like to recognize Canada's outstanding Consul General in New York, the Honorable John Prado. And Canada's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Guillermo Ryshinsky, who is also outstanding. Several years ago, Canada's former Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, spoke to the Foreign Policy Association. He recounted how he was late for a connecting flight at JFK, so they had one of those golf carts waiting to whisk him to the gate. A fellow traveler asked whether she too might have a lift. The gate agent responded, "Ma'am, this vehicle is reserved for the former dictator of Canada." We are committed at the Foreign Policy Association to shining our spotlight on the unique and vital relationship that exists between the United States and Canada. Just last night, we heard from the director of the U.S. government Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. This agency provides an integrated, systematic approach to the development of the necessary vaccines for public health medical emergencies. Our speaker, Dr. Robinson, described the extraordinary cooperation that his agency has received, not only from the Canadian government, but from the Canadian private sector and academia in the race for an Ebola vaccine. And he underscored how no memorandum of understanding or other written agreement was necessary to paper this seamless cooperation. Without indulging in hyperbole, the U.S.-Canadian bilateral relationship is one of the closest and most extensive in the world. The United States and Canada share the world's largest and most comprehensive trading relationship. The United States and Canada have one of the world's largest investment relationships. I sound like I'm from Texas. And the United States and Canada form the largest integrated energy market in the world. With Alberta front and center in the energy news these days, I, for one, look forward to the Premier's remarks. They will be delivered after lunch has been served, and I'm very pleased that our director at the Foreign Policy Association, Bill Mills, CEO for the North American region at Citigroup, will formally introduce the Premier. Thank you and bon appetit.
My name is Bill Mills, and I'm the CEO of North America for Citigroup. On behalf of my colleagues at Citi, and more specifically, our 131 employees who live and work in the province of Alberta, it is my privilege to introduce the Honorable Jim Prentice, Premier of the province of Alberta. Jim Prentice was sworn in as Alberta's 16th Premier on September 15th, 2014. Originally from South Porcupine, Ontario, Jim Prentice received a Bachelor's of Commerce from the University of Alberta and a Bachelor of Laws from Dalhousie University. He was designated as a Queen's Counsel in 1992 and a member of the Privy Council in 2006. As a young lawyer, Jim built a strong reputation for his expertise on property rights and his ability to resolve First Nation negotiations. In 2004, he was elected the federal member of the Parliament for Calgary North Centre and was re-elected in 2006 and 2008. During his time in Ottawa, Jim held several challenging cabinet positions, including industry, environment, Indian affairs, and northern development. Mr. Prentice also served as chair of the Operations Committee, a role Prime Minister Harper described as the chief operating officer of the Government of Canada. After leaving federal politics, Jim accepted a role as vice chair and senior executive vice president of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. He led the bank in the critical areas of energy infrastructure, responsible resource development, and the Asian Pacific Rim. He gained respect internationally as a North American authority on the world energy market. As Premier of Alberta, Mr. Prentice is at the helm of Canada's energy province during a challenging time in its history. We are honored to be able to host him here today. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Alberta Premier Jim Prentice.
Well, thank you, Bill. Noel, also, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And Bill, thank you for that kind introduction. I come from a long line of Canadian hockey players, and my father taught me never to read your own press clippings, that you're only as good as your next shift, so I always keep that in mind. There are a number of distinguished people in the room, but I did want to just point out a couple of folks who are here. Gordon Giffin, the former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, who's been an incredible friend of our country, is here. Gordon, welcome. Alberta's representative in the United States, Rob Merrifield, is here as well. And I particularly want to point out and say thank you to John Prado, who is the Consul General for Canada in New York, as a dear friend of mine, and who has been so successful in that role that he's really defined expectations in our country for Consul General. So John, thank you very much. And I certainly appreciate the invitation from the Foreign Policy Association to speak here today. It's an honor to be here. This is an incredible, historic setting. It's a week that's a bit like that for me. I was in Washington this week, and I'll recap some of what my sense of things. But I also was able to stop and visit with Governor Christie on my way through, and was able to meet with him in the office of Woodrow Wilson. So I've been exposed to a great deal of American history over the course of the week. And I didn't go to, I was actually accepted to Harvard Law School, but I didn't go there, and maybe but for this invitation from the Foreign Policy Association, I guess if I'd accepted that invitation, I might have got here on my own. But nonetheless, it's an honor to be here. For almost a century, this association has really done an admirable job of instilling debate on public opinion on global affairs and keeping Americans current on the defining foreign policy issues of our time. And certainly this is a time when we require exactly that. And so I'm pleased to have this opportunity to add my voice to this ongoing dialogue that's taking place through your forum, really on some of the most important subjects that we face today in terms of U.S. foreign policy, whether we speak of free trade and free markets. Because free trades and free markets and the openness, the economic openness that they display is really at the root of North America's success, not just economically, but politically and socially as well. It's helped bring Canada and the U.S. together closely under the umbrella of the Free Trade Agreement, so that we can speak really with one voice in the international community, in which many of our most deeply held beliefs as North Americans find really only a tenuous purchase. And you know, integrated markets, free enterprise and integrated markets remain as essential as ever in the 21st century. And you know, although I believe that the inherent worth of such markets is sometimes overlooked in the rush to strengthen other basic values, and certainly democracy, human rights, equality are all rightfully in the place of being our highest order public goods. But it is prosperity. It is prosperity at the end of the day which creates opportunities for these other values to in fact flourish. And this is just as true in North America, where these values are solidly entrenched, as it is in other parts of the world where they most assuredly are not. Here in the United States and in Canada, we often fail to realize, I think, that that we can have more of what we cherish, namely peace and security, dignity and freedom, by shoring up our material foundation and by providing space for everyone to prosper in our society. And that it is through open and integrated economies that we are actually able to achieve all of these things. And of course, when I speak of free markets, no one understands better the genius of free markets than the citizens of the United States of America. Your nation has long accepted that, as the economist Milton Friedman put it, and I quote, "There is no alternative way of improving the lot of ordinary people that can hold a candle to the productive activities that are unleashed by a free enterprise system." And we can see the truth of that statement in our extensive and efficient North American markets, sheltered by the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement and later by the NAFTA agreement. This economy, which we share, fuels prosperity on both sides of the border, and this is most certainly the case in the province of which I am the Premier. Close to 90% of Alberta's exports are destined for the United States. Trade between my province of Alberta and the United States is enormous, ranging from $75 billion to $100 billion annually, more than $200 million each and every day. And from Alberta's end, that trade encompasses much more than just oil. It's about machinery, it's about natural gas, it's about petrochemicals, it's about fertilizer, it's about agri-products, it's about financial services, and forestry. And in fact, if I look at Alberta's top 20 export destinations, 17 of them are in fact United States, individual states. Moreover, we invest together. Fully 2/3 of the inbound foreign direct investment that comes to my province of Alberta originates in your country. And more than 60% of the tourists who visit our province are in fact Americans. And so the sheer volume of these exchanges is really made possible by free trade. It's free trade that we have to thank really for the North American integrated marketplace. And it is a market that is dynamic, it is fast-moving, it's innovative, and I think, as most of you in this room know, it is responsive to the most subtle of signals, either by global markets or by government policymakers. And actually, it adapts with breathtaking speed to accept and act upon changes in technology or changes in supply and demand. But I say to people, as a reminder, that our collective success is not an accident. It is not an accident. The relationship between Canada and the United States is comprised of 1 part proximity and 9 parts goodwill and common sense. This is worth remembering. These are not my words, ladies and gentlemen. These are the words actually of President Harry Truman. And although he spoke them 68 years ago, they equally ring true today as when he said them. Or as President Kennedy put it, it is economics that has made us partners. And that is assuredly the case. And really, I can imagine no clearer illustration of this than the energy sector. Energy matters profoundly. Energy matters profoundly to the national interests of both the United States and Canada. Our two countries, I think as Noel mentioned, have successfully developed the largest, most integrated free energy marketplace in the world. It's a unique phenomenon that no one else has been able to replicate. It is unmatched anywhere in the world. And this integrated energy marketplace has, of course, multiple centers of excellence. We find it in Houston and in the largest city in my province of Calgary, where many of the big decisions are made about resource development and where industry is, of course, located. We see it also in the financial acumen, the financial centers here in New York, Toronto, and again, Houston and Calgary, where the financing of this industry takes place. The companies that make up this sector, really, they share the same knowledge base, they share the same technology base, they share the same managerial talent, and fundamentally the same labor skill pools. And they mobilize very quickly to take advantage of technological opportunities to achieve energy production increases. And as I learned in my time as a banker, these markets move so quickly that they outpace the ability of even the most sophisticated of analysts to predict what is going to happen next. We have seen in every aspect of the energy marketplace through the so-called energy renaissance that over the last 10 years, a remarkable transformation of the economic landscape of North America. And so all of this makes North America's integrated energy market really a profound economic force, an economic force on both sides of the border. And the renaissance that we have seen in both Canada and the United States is only augmenting the positives that we share as North Americans. You know, Canada and the United States have both increased their production of natural gas and oil faster than forecast. The United States has now passed Russia as the #1 global producer of oil and gas. And American shale oil production has soared, even as domestic U.S. oil consumption has stayed relatively flat in response to changing appliances and vehicle efficiencies. And we've seen substitution as well of cleaner fuels. We've seen substitution of natural gas for other fuels, especially coal, which is also taking place at a faster pace in North America than anywhere else in the world. And of course, a steady stream of export licenses for LNG facilities is under review, and the United States is on track to become an LNG exporter within the next 12 to 18 months. And meanwhile, in Canada, these same market forces have produced remarkable results. Canada is now producing more than 3.5 million barrels of oil per day, the bulk of it from my home province of Alberta, most of it from new technology breakthroughs in the oil sands. And that total could reach as much as 6 million barrels per day by 2030. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the fundamental point which I wish to explore with you today is that this energy renaissance has really opened up a triple North American competitive advantage. An advantage over the rest of the industrial world, a security advantage, an industrial feedstock advantage, and an environmental advantage and opportunity. And I'd like to address each of these in turn because I think we can only appreciate how we will gain from all of this as North Americans if we examine each of these opportunities. And I begin with the national security advantage, which is, I think, fundamentally more important in the United States than it is in my country, given the relative nature of our size. National security has been the central preoccupation of the United States foreign policy for at least the last century. Historically, the need to import a substantial portion of the United States oil from suppliers outside of North America has undermined U.S. national security and U.S. global influence. Each and every day, we are reminded of the risks that such dependency imposes. We are reminded amid the emergence of non-state actors in the Middle East and fresh tensions, of course, with Russia. But now this situation really is changing for the better. It's changing for the better because escalating oil production in both Canada and the United States, let alone what is taking place in Mexico, along with improved abilities to extract unconventional hydrocarbons, as illustrated by the oil sands and shale oil here in the United States, are really transforming. They are transforming the long sought of goal of energy independence from a pipe dream to probability. And that dream, my friends, is only a few years away from realization. And so the United States, in particular, is in a position of strength as it becomes less vulnerable than ever to supply shocks. And American decision makers will, I think it's fair to say, soon be able to dispense with the political calculus that comes from a dependency on worldwide supply networks, many of them regimes that are fundamentally opposed to American values. And Canada, of course, obviously, has a major role to play in these developments. My province of Alberta ships each and every day 2.5 million barrels of oil into the United States of America. We are the largest supplier of crude oil to the United States. We contribute 26% of the United States oil imports. Total Canadian production actually accounts for more than a third. This is almost double what the next closest supplier, namely Saudi Arabia, provides to the United States. And so these numbers are enormous, and they are in fact growing. And as an added bonus, roughly 90 cents actually of every dollar that is spent on Canadian oil by the United States returns itself into the U.S. economy thanks to the integrated marketplace that we share. And I point out, for example, that the supply chain that comprises the oil sands industry contains over 1,900 American companies that form part of that integrated supply chain. Canada's pipeline and distribution network is also instrumental to delivering natural gas to markets in the lower 48 states. And so we are proud to support the efforts of your great nation, our neighbor, our partner, our friend, to increase this security in a dangerous world. And we have been doing this together for a long time. We are closer than trading partners. We are family. I think each of us finds that in our own personal family history. I recounted this week when I spoke in Washington my own family history. My father was a hockey player. He played briefly with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but he spent most of his career as a Canadian in the United States, where he played with, if there are any hockey fans in the room, such storied and fabled teams as the Hershey Bears and the Philadelphia Rockets and the Fresno Wolves and a team in Hollywood as well. But, you know, later in his life, he's passed away now, but later in his life, he was inadvertently the recipient of a small pension that he received from the United States because he had, of course, as a young man, paid into U.S. Social Security. And so these checks began arriving. They weren't expected or asked for. And they were not a large amount of money. I think it was $59 per month that would show up. And my parents, feeling the way that they did about the United States and the values that they imparted to their children, they would save that money. They put it in a special bank account. And they would wait until it had grown after 18 months to enough money to justify a trip to Montana. And they would hop in the car because my father said, this money belongs to Americans and we're going to spend it in the United States, not in Canada. And so that's how close we are. It speaks to the values that we share. And, you know, Gordon Giffin and myself and others saw it this week. We were proud in Washington on Wednesday. I'm not sure if this was noted here in New York, but the Congressional Medal of Honor was awarded to veterans from the Second World War. They were all in their 90s. One gentleman was 107 years old. These were the veterans, 900 from Canada, 900 from the United States, known as the Devil's Brigade, which was the very first special forces operation that was created in the Second World War. A joint Canadian-U.S. enterprise awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor in a ceremony that I think moved all of us to tears. There are perhaps 45 of these individuals left alive today, and it's taken this long for that contribution to be recognized. So we have been at this together for a long, long time. The industrial advantage of which I speak, I think, is well known in this room. It's equally significant because having an abundance of hydrocarbons is a tremendous boon for intensive energy industries. And they come to mind as cement, as fertilizer, as heavy manufacturing, as petrochemicals. And as we know, the boom in natural gas production in North America has already sponsored a resurgence and a reshoring of jobs here in the United States. All of this is part of the North American energy marketplace which I speak of. We have essentially opened up, as North Americans, a massive energy cost advantage over any other industrial market in the world. But I say to you that governments must cultivate an environment in which industry can readily maintain that competitive edge. And above all else, this means building the necessary infrastructure to allow these markets to flourish. And that includes access into the United States market of Canadian heavy oils. We need to continue to enhance and continue to invest in the network of pipelines, but also transmission lines that knit our energy economy together. Last month, for example, I mean, this is taking place on a steady basis. Last month, for example, I attended the grand opening of Enbridge's Flanagan South Seaway pipeline. This is a pipeline which stretches today nearly 600 miles from Illinois to Oklahoma, and it is a vital link in the connection between Canadian crude oil and American consumers. 600,000 barrels a day of Canadian crude now flow through the Flanagan South pipeline and on to Gulf Coast refineries, the largest complex of refineries in the world. And so this Canadian product does create jobs. It creates American jobs, it creates permanent jobs, it creates refinery jobs. And the vast majority of the product that is produced in those refineries is then consumed here in the United States. And so, you know, Flanagan South really is an example of the mutual benefits that come from North America's integrated energy economy, the largest free market that anyone enjoys. But I say to you that at the other end of the spectrum, we have the circumstances of the Keystone Pipeline. And now, I have long been a vocal advocate of the Keystone Pipeline. I will say that again here today. This is a project which creates jobs, which is environmentally supportable, which is in the best interest and the national interest of both Canada and the United States. The oil it would carry is produced in my province, and it is produced under environmental standards that are at least as high as the standards that apply to any barrel of oil that is produced on the American continent, and much, much more rigorous than the standards that apply to much other oil that is imported and landed from elsewhere on the U.S. continent without interference. You know, the U.S. has historically addressed its security issues via a policy of diversity of supply and facilitating really and supporting open markets for energy access, for energy trade, and facilitating the construction of infrastructure to facilitate the importation of oil from multiple markets. And Canada has been one of those suppliers, and I would say to you, proudly so. And I think for Canadians, that is what has made the delay and uncertainty surrounding the Keystone Pipeline so very, very confusing. Now, I want to be clear that the energy relationship that is shared by our two nations is much bigger than Keystone. And certainly the economic relationship that my province shares with the United States of America is much bigger than any single pipeline. And so I say that really what we need is a renewed focus on the bigger picture and on the longer term, and that we must not allow other things to deter us from that. We need to keep our minds set on building and capitalizing on the triple advantage that I mentioned earlier in my comments, because these are North American advantages. They are not American advantages, and they are not Canadian advantages. We maximize the opportunities associated with them if we work together. And so when I speak of the environment, I speak of the environmental advantage that comes from further integration of our energy marketplaces as North Americans, which really prepares the ground for closer cooperation on environmental policy and on the sharing of best practices. And there are many who have innovations to share, and Alberta, I can say, is certainly amongst them. We recognize in my province that energy production comes with global consequences. In Alberta, we believe that if you are in the energy business, you are in the environment business, and you need to be good at both of them. And we've frankly long been leaders in taking action, and I guess if there's a silver lining that emerges from the debate that's taking place surrounding the Keystone Pipeline, it is that I think there is a much better appreciation of the facts of which I speak. Our jurisdiction was the first to regulate industrial gas emissions with a comprehensive policy, the first to attach an industrial price on carbon in an industrial setting. In fact, this regulatory approach has prevented approximately 51 megatons of greenhouse gases from entering the atmosphere. And under this policy, we were the first actually on the continent to attach a price to industrial carbon, because emitters who are not able to meet mandated regulatory standards have options, including the purchase of performance credits, the purchase of offset credits, or actually paying money into a fund which is focused on innovation and research to reduce emissions otherwise. And that fund is at work. That fund has collected over $500 million and invested hundreds of millions of dollars, including in the United States, in clean energy, technology, and adaptation projects. And we've also tried to encourage energy efficiency at an individual level. We've initiated a program that has enabled fleet operators to install fuel-efficient technology in their vehicles. We've adopted a renewable fuel standard, which requires the blending of ethanol and biodiesel. And even with these efforts, we recognize, as others do, that the most significant source of greenhouse gas emissions are, in fact, at the consumption level with tailpipe emissions. And so in my province, we have taken action. We have invested $2 billion to support new and expanded public transit through a program we call Green Trip, knowing that in Canada, a transit rider creates 65% fewer emissions than someone who drives an automobile. And underpinning all of these efforts, ladies and gentlemen, is a robust scientific environmental monitoring regime which is conducted at arm's length from government and where data is publicly accessible, because we have nothing to hide in terms of the data and the information of what we're doing. And since I became the Premier 4 months ago, our government is working on a renewed and an updated climate change strategy that will demonstrate how Alberta will continue to do its part. And I say to you that the private sector, that industry is also coming to the table. We have something called COSIA, the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, which all of the major oil producers in our province are part of. It allows them to pool intellectual property, set aside intellectual property restrictions, and make sure that technological advances are moved most quickly through to production so that everyone benefits from the rapid diffusement of energy technologies. And so when the United States purchases Alberta oil, customers help in basically with all of these enhancements and commitments. And these are just, I think, a few of the examples of what is taking place in Canada and in our province. But I want to say that I would be the first to admit that if we are going to have a meaningful effect in protecting the environment and the climate, and if we are going to capitalize on the full benefits of a North American integrated energy marketplace, then we will have to think bigger than we have in the past. We will have to lead the world, and that's why we have invested in things such as carbon capture and storage, a game-changing technology that will, one of the only technologies actually, that will reduce rather than merely avert greenhouse gas emissions. And our province is currently investing $1.3 billion in carbon capture projects and storage projects. We are a province of only 4 million people. If you take the time and do the math, you'll find that this amounts to more than $300 for every single citizen of our province. And I would say to you that no one else in the world has invested dollars in the science of CCS on anywhere near that scale. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there is, in fact, a lot happening. Greenhouse gases do not respect borders. They do not respect boundaries. Climate change is a global issue, and no one can afford to address it in isolation. I've long been an example of someone who has worked towards harmonized North American standards. I believe in harmonized North American standards for emission reductions, reporting, and especially for industrial emissions. And when I was Canada's Minister of the Environment, I worked together with the Obama administration to arrive at North American-based fuel efficiency standards for motor vehicles and light-duty trucks. This remains today as one of the most significant steps that's been taken to reduce carbon emissions on the continent, and it was done by both countries, negotiated and brought into place on both sides of the border. And so this is an approach that we think should be followed. It will provide certainty for businesses. It will make sure that when it comes to the environment and enhancing the environment, that we have continental approaches which will benefit all of us in terms of the protection of the environment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, this trend towards greater cooperation across provincial, state, and national boundaries has been waning rather than increasing on the environmental front. And we've seen actually fragmentation replacing the unity of purpose that we are going to need as North Americans, and we need a coordinated response. But in some U.S. jurisdictions, instead, we are seeing policy proposals that are subnational, that are designed actually to exclude Canadian energy from the U.S. marketplace. Specifically designed to exclude crude oil from Alberta's oil sands, from access to U.S. markets, while at the same time according a free pass to comparable oils from countries like Venezuela, or frankly, oils that are heavier than the Canadian oil sands oil, coming from places such as California. And clearly, as we know from the Keystone debate, opposition has crystallized around infrastructure projects like pipelines that we really do need to safely move energy across the North American continent on a coordinated basis. And so I say to you that we actually are headed for the worst of all possible worlds. A proliferation of subnational levels of diverse standards that apply to some kinds of oil, but not others, apply to some forms of energy, but not others, apply to some types of transportation, but not others. And I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, this is not the genius of free trade at work. And so having served as Canada's Environment Minister, I think I can speak to the utility of broader measures and the necessity of getting things done at a senior level that are in the interests of both of our countries. And, you know, I represented Canada as well at the Copenhagen conference in 2009. I have the scars to prove that attendance. And you know, discord between Canada and the United States at Copenhagen didn't really advantage either one of our countries. And frankly, it sold our achievements short, and it sold our possibilities short. Because the country that's actually made the most significant environmental achievements since the Copenhagen Accord is in fact the United States of America in terms of the reduction of emissions, something that was unimaginable even at that time. So let me just say then in conclusion that as I see it, there are three goals that Canada and the United States should pursue in order to take advantage of this triple opportunity, this triple advantage that we have as North Americans. Firstly, we need to strengthen the policy framework of the North American energy marketplace. We need to return to the principles of free trade that are enshrined in NAFTA. We need to address energy-related subjects on a continental basis instead of allowing ill-informed prejudices to detract from the efficiency of markets. At the very moment that changes in technology and innovation have brought energy dependence within our grasp. Secondly, we need to establish North America as a leader in environmental performance, because ecosystems stretch across borders just like trade flows, and healthy ecosystems are indispensable to our quality of life. And market-driven solutions at the end of the day are the quickest and the most practical way of confronting climate change and of managing industrial emissions. And so we need to move quickly in this area to preempt non-tariff trade restrictions from masquerading as environmental policy and damaging what they are supposed to protect. And the third goal really is for Canada and the United States to enable the continued development of safe and efficient energy infrastructure to continue to build on the strength of what we currently possess. Policy coordination is not enough. We must construct projects that will yield tangible results, and we have to match rhetoric with action. And none of this, I would say to you today, none of this will necessarily be easy. You know, I've always admired one of your more colorful presidents, Teddy Roosevelt. He put it this way. He said, "We cannot afford meeting great issues. All that we can determine for ourselves is whether we shall meet them ill or well." And so with the right choices, Canada and the United States can fully reap the rewards of our partnership. And there is no smarter choice that we can make than to strengthen that partnership by nurturing free trade and deeper economic integration. Free markets. Free markets produce impressive results when they are allowed to work. And it's time that we gave them space to do exactly that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I'm just going to grab some water. Okay.
Premier, thank you for those eloquent and informative remarks. Premier has accepted to take a few questions. If you would raise your hand, and I will recognize you. I see Ed Cox there. Ed?
Okay. Well, you're quite right that, you know, essentially every president since Richard Nixon has used the term, you're quite right, for the first time, has advocated the economic integration of our energy industry, and in particular the integration of Canada's oil sands into the energy marketplace of the United States and on a common basis. I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever that we have within our grasp, whether you call it energy independence or energy security, our three countries working together, Canada, the United States, and certainly when you add Mexico, we have the capacity to be completely secure in terms of our energy use. I don't think you know, we could discuss what's taking place with the Saudi Arabias and their abandonment of their position as a swing producer in the global market. We could deal with that, but I don't think any of that changes the fundamental technological resource breakthrough that we have that gives us energy independence. My point is that that is unfolding in real time. It is a possibility that we can only realize if we work together as North Americans, because we, in that way, harness the resource endowments that we share within a free market system. We can do that, and if we do it properly, we will be able to, in the case of the United States, exert more global independence and global influence. We'll be able to be more environmentally responsible, and we will have a cost advantage and over anyone else in the world. And I make the point not lightly about the environment. You know, Bill is on his way to Beijing. I've spent a lot of time in Beijing. If you ever doubt that as North Americans, we have fundamentally an environmental competitive advantage over everybody else in the world, go to Beijing, and it becomes self-evident. And so the quality of the environment that we have in North America is something that I think will be a defining competitive advantage in coming generations if we take advantage of it.
First, let me commend you on your environmental policies with respect to carbon capture and storage and then investing $1.3 billion in that initiative. It seems to me that, you know, we talk about energy integration between the United States and Canada, and it's allowed us to become much more energy independent. And recently, it seems like we ought to be doing the same thing as it results, you know, towards environmental issues related to carbon capture and storage, pooling our investments, pooling our innovation. How do we make that happen? And I say that when just yesterday the Department of Energy pulled the funding of a multi-billion-dollar carbon capture project in the United States because it was originated under a different administration. So how do we work together as the two countries to do that?
Well, I hope we are, and certainly there's more to be done. At one time, we had something between Canada and the United States called the Clean Energy Dialogue. It still exists. I don't know if it's as robust as it was. I was the Canadian minister responsible for it, and it was actually under that aegis that we worked on and eventually adopted the common fuel efficiency standards for vehicles and reached decisions to harmonize the entire transportation grid on a North American basis. So, you know, a lot of this involves very detailed regulatory work that doesn't attract attention. I will tell you, I met earlier this week with representatives of the U.S. Department of Energy. They're very interested in the carbon capture and storage projects that we have in Canada. They've expressed an interest in working with us, accessing the scientific data that is collected as these projects become operational later this year. And I've welcomed that. I've said that, you know, we are interested in the exportation of knowledge, in working together. Carbon capture and storage, you know, remains a science initiative at this time. But if we can bring the cost down, it is a way truly to reduce carbon emissions. And we should be working closely together, again, on a cross-border basis to achieve results.
Yes, in the back there. Heather?
Thank you so much for your talk, and I'm really humbled by your optimism with the state of things. But I feel like you didn't talk anything about options for new energy, like wind or solar, or we're talking about fossil fuels in this debate. And forgive me if that's my, you know, naivete. I'm just a student of Professor Latif's here. But what about renewable energy, like solar and wind?
Right. Well, certainly, I mean, I didn't get into a discussion of renewable energies here. You know, our province has focused on renewables where we have opportunities, and so we have more wind capacity than anyone in Canada in the province of Alberta. It's something that we've taken a lot of pride in, and we continue to build increased wind capacity. We have, beyond that, a limited number of hydro projects that we are currently exploring, but we don't have a resource endowment that lends itself to that. And so our focus on this is to have the cleanest energy systems possible. You know, when we're all concerned about carbon emissions, and as we are, the thing that we need to be most concerned about, frankly, is burning coal, because 40% of the carbon in the atmosphere actually came from burning coal. Our country has led the way in terms of the adoption of a policy that will phase out dated coal plants and essentially replace them with cleaner fuels, natural gas specifically. This is a national policy that was developed in Canada by myself when I was Canada's Environment Minister, and it is now coming to fruition in my province as plants will be phased out on a defined basis over the course of the next 20 years, with the exception of 2 plants that were brand new that were built in 2005. So certainly we are interested in having the cleanest energy systems possible. You know, I would say in defense of my own country, Canada, we have one of the cleanest electricity systems of any democracy in the world, largely because of the hydro capacity that we have in parts of Canada. And so from our perspective, we're interested in making that even cleaner. And so we'll make progress as well in renewables. But our objective, knowing that we do produce hydrocarbons, is to have the highest possible environmental standards in every metric of anyone in the world that is in the energy business. Good comment, though.
Well, Premier, thank you very much for gracing our forum. We hope you'll come back soon.
Thank you. Thank you.